Well, welcome back to part 2 of Captain Harald Hartman Dahlmann. Now we'll be talking to Harald about his time when he first arrived in America. He's at Lakeland Air Force Base and he's been given $800 to go off and buy a car. But he and his best buddy, Hans, decided that if they put their money together, they can get a better car. So, Harry, what did you do? You had $1,600 and
that
you
is
went off.
Exactly true. So here we go. We had altogether $1,600 and we went into San Antonio. I will never forget that. That is long ago. We went to Dave's Used Cars. It was a Mexican that had been selling used cars. And one of the biggest ones that we saw was a Cadillac Coupe Sedan de Ville, about 4 or 5 years old. I can't remember actually. It was a convertible, and it was about at least 2 times as big as my Fiat that I had in Germany, and twice as wide. And it had an engine about it's a this 8-cylinder big block engines.
Yes.
That's what we bought.
Right.
That car we used together, of course, on Lakeland Air Force Base, and then we used it when we got our traveling papers, to report to Phoenix after 2 weeks, Williams Air Force Base. We were done it all by ourselves. Everybody was
fantastic.
Yeah. So we had our car, and we set course westbound along the Rio Grande village to El Paso. And in El Paso, halfway between San Antonio and Phoenix, more or less, the car broke down. And we found out, because we had never opened the hood, that the car was only driving on 7 cylinders.
Yeah.
The 8th cylinder was not even a spark plug in there.
Yeah. They didn't even notice it.
Not with this type of car. We didn't notice it. They fixed it, and we ran out of money. We just had enough money to buy the fuel to report to Williams Air Force Base. That's where the thing started.
Right.
The real training started.
So it's now serious business. You and 3 other German partners, you arrive at Williams Air Force Base. You don't know what to expect when you get there.
No,
you thought that you were all going to be buddies sharing the same room and all that.
Yes,
but that wasn't the case. You were all deliberately split up, and you found yourself a new roommate.
Yes.
Tell us about that, Harry.
Yes, we were divided into 2 groups, into 2 different squadrons. I was in one, and there was the other one with another 4 Germans. And what they did to prevent us to speak German among each other, for good reason, to learn and be better in English. So they put us together into the BOQ's, Bachelor Officers Quarter, with an American. And I quickly established a very close friendship to my roommate. That was the one that I mentioned before, Gary Rupert Fisk. He was a brilliant brain. During the academics, he maxed all tests. From what I knew, he even was an honorary release student of the Air Force Academy. But he had one problem. The problem was he was weak in flying, doing many things together, handling an aircraft.
But you, first of all, you start your class work on the T-37, and the T-37 is it the Cessna trainer?
Yes, a Cessna trainer.
And that's the side-by-side.
Side-by-side trainer. Of course, it's an aircraft that does not fly supersonic. It's a typical initial training aircraft for somebody that wants to become a military pilot. And this Williams Air Force Base is a typical, the Americans have a lot of these type of bases, a typical initial training basis for American fighter pilots.
Step one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they have T-37s and later on T-38s.
T-38. T-38 is quite different because that's supersonic.
Yeah.
Now on the T-37, you have to go solo within
10 hours.
10 hours?
Yes, it's the same thing.
Hours.
Within 10 hours you had to go solo. The solo, we may have to explain it to the people again. It's a rectangular traffic pattern. It's a takeoff leg, a crosswind leg, a downwind leg, a base leg, and a final leg. Rectangular.
And you do this multiple times.
And you do this multiple times, and and you are supposed to be able to do this by yourselves without an instructor on your right-hand side with less than 10 hours.
Right.
And
that includes touch and go?
It's always
landing, takeoff.
3 touch and goes.
Right.
You know? So 3 takes off and 3 landings. Okay. I did this within 7 or 8 hours. I cannot remember exactly. I was below 10 hours, and Gary did not. So if you didn't do this within 10 hours, you had a board session. That means the flight commander and the instructor pilots came together and questioned whether to continue the training on the pilot or wash him out of the program. He had 2 or 3 of these sessions and finally made it after about 20 hours to start his first solo flight. It was over 20 hours. I remember that because when he was sent solo onto the runway, I was on my 30-hour transition check. That was the first check flight that you had to make. That you go into the area, do spins and spin recovery and things like this, and then come back home and do some traffic patterns. That's it. So we taxied behind him onto the runway, and he was cleared for takeoff, which he did. And about halfway up in pattern altitude, for whatever reason, he pulled up straight up, went into a so-called spin. This is when the aircraft is uncontrollable and losing altitude and twists around its vertical axis. There's a way of getting out of it, but you have to have some time.
Altitude, yeah.
You know, some altitude. He crashed about a mile or 1.5 miles down the runway, and we saw the smoke coming up. Of course, all flight operations were cancelled immediately, and here I was sitting in number 1 position with my check instructor, awaiting my transition check. It took a few minutes. We saw the helicopter going towards the crash site, and then my instructor insisted on continue the check. Now he was the flight commander; he could cancel all.
Override.
He could override everything.
Yes.
So we went out there, and I passed the check. I failed the check. I was unable to do whatever I had to do because I knew my body was burning to death down there. We came back, I did some landings, and he failed me, and he said, we have to do the check again. And Gary was dead. It was about a week later, I was sent with an American Air Force aircraft, and the remains of Gary to his family. His father, as far as I remember, was base commander on an air base in Alaska. So that was the first big shock. It was within the first few months of my training. I recovered quickly from it and went through the complete training. I did my judo. I had my judo trainer for myself, and I finished the T-37, and from there the whole class went into the T-38. Now the T-38 is a completely different aircraft, but it's to my knowledge and to my experience afterwards, it's an ideal aircraft to be prepared to fly later on the F104. It is a high-performance aircraft that flies up to Mach 1.4. The instructor sits on the back seat. It's not like on the T-37. You're the pilot, student pilot in the front seat, except when you do the instrument training, then you sit in the back seat, because you sit in dark. You know, they can cover the back seat completely, so you can only rely on instruments and doing the instrument flying and doing the instrument checks. Both trainings were about 130 hours on the T-37, then 130 hours on the T-38, and if you passed both of it with the final checks, came the big graduation. The graduation is taken very seriously in the States.
Yes, I understand. And in actual fact, your graduation day was quite special, because there was it wasn't just you four Germans that were there. There was lots of other American graduates that graduated at the same time. Oh yes, of course.
There was initially 28 American Air Force Academy students. Of them, about 8 or 10 washed out. So there were 20 left, 20 Americans left.
And of the 4 German pilots?
From our 4 German pilots from our group, 2 went home.
Only 2, that's it. 2 went home, so there's left Hans and
2,
you.
yes.
Which was pretty handy, because he owned half the car anyway.
Yes.
You wouldn't have had to found $800 to pay anybody.
No,
off.
that wouldn't have been good.
And there's a great story about Hans later on anyway, in part 3 we'll be talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
But of course we had some accidents and incidents. Gary Fisk was the first one. The other one was on the T-38, when 2 German pilots who were cleared to fly solo into their training areas joined up, which they were not allowed to do, and flew formation. And because we had our formation checkout already, so they were training and probing formation flight. Now the lead was had been entering a so-called barrel roll, when you make a 360 roll around the longitudinal exit of the aircraft, with the number 2 German on his wing. But it was not a good barrel roll, so they wound up into a very steep descent, exceeding all speeds. So he decided to signal to his co-pilot, or to his pilot on the wing, to extend the speed brakes. Now that is done with a movement to the helmet, which he did. The other one, that was flying his own aircraft on his wing, was misinterpreting it, and instead of putting the speed brakes out, he put the gear down. And it ruptured, the gear went down of course, but it ruptured the hydraulic beams of the gear, so the gear was hanging loose. You could not land the aircraft anymore. To make it short, they were screaming, of course. The lead aircraft quickly disappeared in his in his area, and the other one, a good friend of mine, was sitting there up there in this aircraft, knowing he would have to bail out, because you can't land this aircraft like this. The base commander went out there and led him to the bailout area. Every airbase has a bailout area. So if something is wrong with the aircraft that you cannot bring back to the base and you have to bail out, you have to bail out on an area where you don't hit a city or a village or something like that. So they went there, and he bailed out and survived it, had no injuries, I don't want to talk what happened afterwards because there was, of course,
an inquiry.
Interrogation inquiry. Anyway, it so happened that they both were allowed to stay in the training, and they both finished the training till we had the graduation. And all the parents came, of course. You know, when they give you the wings, the German pilots had not only one wing; we had two wings: the German wing and the American wing. So whenever you saw a pilot with the two wings, you knew he was in Germany. You knew he had been training in the States. And
must have been a very proud moment for you.
A very proud moment. And one thing I'd like to mention is, which would be nowadays absolutely impossible, for our graduation, the Thunderbirds were invited. And we had a Thunderbird exhibition, about half an hour, just as an honor for our graduation.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I think that was fantastic.
Yeah.
That was the basic and primary training in the United States Air Force. After this, we departed with our American friends and never saw each other again.
Right, right. And then you stay at Williams.
Yeah, the way the Americans do it. You know, after the T-37, T-38 training, there's a grading. They have a grading system. And the top 2 or 3 of the class, it includes academics and includes the flight training, of course. They can select the aircraft that they want to fly on later on, which means the top of our class, they went on of course a single-seater
fighter jet.
Fighter jet. It was at that time it was the F100. It was called Super Sabre, and it was the F101, and a 2-engine, mainly reconnaissance aircraft, and the F102. I think it was called Delta Dagger, and the first F4Cs were on the horizon. So the top of the class people went onto this aircraft.
So of the 28 plus 4, is that right?
Yes, yes.
So out of the 32 of you?
No. It was, remember, out of the 28, about 8 washed out of the program. They never made it finished.
Right.
You know, on some of them washed out on the T-37 already. Some of them on the T-38. Many of them washed out because they were unable to do a safe formation flying. And the formation training was some of the last trainings that we had to do. Yeah, they were washed out. They went onto helicopters or onto cargo aircraft.
Right. And
don't ask me. It was about 20 Americans and 2 Germans in this squadron and in this class. And then on the other, of course, the same on the other class, on the other squadron. It's always 2 squadrons, right? On the other squadron also between 20 and 25. And I think 3 Germans in the other class. They were from the German Navy.
That's right, the Marine.
Yes, from the German Navy.
Yeah.
So altogether, later on, we went with 5 or 6 people. With 5 people, we went to Luke Air Force Base. It's also in Phoenix, on the southwestern side of Phoenix, where they train the real aircraft. The fighter aircraft later on that are being spread all over the world. So that is where we trained the F104, they trained the F100, and they trained the F101 over there, and the Americans, not the Germans, and the FOC. That was on Luke Air Force Base.
Right, and that's where you went next?
We had between the training, the finish of training in Williams and Luke, we had about 6 weeks. That's when we did our big cross America drive.
So you and Hans, you and Hans took a tour around America for 6 weeks.
We went to the West Coast,
and
California,
and then to the East Coast. And
then on the West Coast all the way up to Canada, then through Canada to the east, then on the east back down to the south, and then back to Phoenix. Was almost six tours.
Luke Airport. So the old Cadillac served you well then.
The Cadillac served us well.
Yeah.
Sometimes we slept in it. Because on the highway, we went on a parking lot on the highway, and the weather was nice. We had blankets. The car had reclining seats, electrical reclining seats.
Yes.
And it was so big, I could stretch myself all the way. Mainly, of course, we went into hotels.
Yes, yes.
Motels, they're called motels.
Okay, Harry. Well, we're going to take a break there on part 2. And when we come back, we'll be at Luke Air Force Base.
Correct.
And we will be with Hans, and we'll be training on the F104, and we'll be talking about all of Harald's experiences then, and the other experience when Hans had a little bit of a problem one day.
Yes, he did. Actually, a big problem.